Welcome back to the second part of the dial recreation video. In this part I want to take a look at how we create these frequency numbers on top of the bar here, and I'm going to look at three different ways to do it. First and foremost, if we take a look at this number, we could just use the system we used before. Now, one thing that I'm going to do differently, instead of using the freehand tool, I'm going to use the Bezier tool. The Bezier tool is a little bit easier and a little bit more mind-bending. So if I click and drag to here and then I move the mouse, you can see what's happening. The line that I dragged is actually part of the tool, almost like a magnetic line that is trying to pull the actual line we're drawing back towards itself. And if I click here, that's the actual curve I get. If I just click, I get a straight line. But if I click and drag, then I get a curved line. Now, Beziers are really hard to use accurately. I'm sure there's people that can make really good sense of them, and there's actually some quite interesting sites, one in particular, that can kind of teach you how to use them. But I just find, for me, it's easier to just use straight lines and then drag stuff so that it moves into the position you want afterwards. So the other thing you need to do to finish a Bezier is hit enter on the keyboard. Once it's done, it's just like we had before. We can move stuff around. You can look at the nodes. You'll notice that some nodes only have one handle. If you need the second handle for a node, just select not the node itself, but just come off to the side of it where the handle should be, click and drag, and you'll end up with the handle. Then you can just sort of grab it and pull it in. Then you can do stuff like we've done before. Make it smooth, make it symmetric, whatever you're trying to do. So the Bezier tool has one specific thing that makes it much more useful than the freehand tool, in that we don't have to find that teal spot. We're just clicking and then moving. And if we close it, it should close that. Now, if sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't, what you can do is highlight here, because what you'll have is two nodes, one on top of the other, and the tool we want, if I can remember which one it is, join selected end nodes. I think nodes, this one here, join selected nodes. The nodes are actually on top of each other. They're sitting on top of each other, so you just have to do that. In this case, they were already joined. You would see that the two ends of the line sitting overlapped if they weren't joined, so that tool did nothing. But just so you're aware, this is a kind of a nicer way of dealing with closed loops, and closed loops are going to be important for one of the methods that we're going to look at for making these numbers. So you now know how to do freehand lines, and the Bezier tool is probably the one that you'll use more often, just because it makes making these lines easier. But knowing more than one way to do something, very useful. So can we use this to make a 6? Well, let's have a look. I'll make that straight up and down. One there, straight up and down, one there, one there. And when I'm saying straight up and down, I'm holding down the control button. Remember, that is what snaps it to specific angles. I think they're 15-degree increments. To there, to there, and then maybe to about there. Then hit enter, and we've got a 6. And you should instantly recognize now from the previous video that you can tidy these up a little bit. And I'm just doing this roughly, and then with the fill and stroke menu, go to stroke style, change that to 0.5. Let's delete the 2 and the 6 there and hit enter, and we've got a 6. Is it perfect? No. Will we see it when it's this small? It'll be fine. 0.5 is probably not quite enough for this. Let's just add a bit here. So at this point I've just realized I've run out of footage of what I thought was the end of the first step and the start of the second step. I'm not entirely sure what's happened there, but it's gone. So I'm just going to close out this bit by saying that I have increased the line thickness from 0.5 to 0.6, and that looks about right. And that's method 1. Using lines, we did that in the first video, so hopefully you should be reasonably comfortable with that. The only thing that we really changed here was switching from the freehand drawing tool to the Bezier tool, just to make life a little bit easier. But other than that, there isn't really anything new here. You can play with this, you can create everything that you need to do these fonts with that. The only gotcha here, it really is that if your fonts have different thicknesses in different parts of the actual character itself, and in that case this may not work for you. But in this particular dial, the fonts are fairly standard, so this would actually work. This is a method, but it won't work all the time. So the next method I'm going to show you is how to get around that issue where everything is not nice and neat and uniform. Okay, here we go again. So with this particular method that I'm going to show you, which is to create an outline of each individual character or digit, it's really helpful to have guides on the screen. So I'm just going to bring in some guides and put them at the natural boundaries of where I expect my lines to be. And I'm going to have quite a few, and that's perfectly fine. These guides don't, I'll just move that over a little bit. These guides don't form part of the final image. They're just there to help you out. So we'll stick one at the top and we'll stick one at the bottom. I'm going to have, like I said, I'm going to have a heap of guides here. Anywhere where I think I'm going to want to snap things to or make sure that things line up, then I'm going to put some guides. I'm going to move that in a minute. And you'll see why I'm putting in so many guides shortly. And we'll just put another one about here and one about here. So anywhere where I think I'm going to need one. Is that going to be enough? Probably. That'll do for now, I think. I might just put one here for the end of the tail on the 6. Okay, so that should be enough guides to work with. We're going to use the Bezier tool, and what I'm going to do is start here, work my way around the 6, and I'm just making, oh, I probably could have used a guide there, but never mind. And close it out. Now to finish a Bezier, hit enter, and here you'll see that this hasn't closed the loop. You can see that the line here ends and the starting line ends. So let's just go to our node select tool. So there are two nodes there. There's the starting node and the end node. They're stacked on top of each other. By dragging a box around them, we select them both and then join the selected nodes and watch what happens. Boom, we now have a closed loop, and that's what we were after. I've missed one guide here, which is going to be about there, and now I can complete that one with the Bezier tool. Just going to pop up there, down there, down there, into there, to there, and close that out by pressing enter, and again we have the non-closed issue. So drag a box around those two nodes, join them, and we're done. So at the moment this looks not quite what we want, so let's just start pushing these out, and hopefully already you can see what's going to happen here. We're going to end up with a nice neat 6, and it's going to take a little bit of just going around and working on things. Grabbing the handles is probably the neatest thing to do here, and I probably could have put some guides in to get the handles in the right place. I want it to be reasonably symmetric. I want some reasonable symmetry here. Try and get these about the same, and of course in here too. One thing we can do here is the old make it smooth, make it symmetric trick, and then get it to snap, and then pulling those handles down that far might be a bit too much. These are nice rounded, so that might be a bit far. So this is just my thought process as I'm going through it, trying to be probably overly clever about it all. Let's push that out, make that smooth and symmetric. And this one probably just needs a wee bit of a kick. Now the reason that dragged a box rather than moved it is because I'm still selected here, so we need to click there and select this one. And probably don't necessarily want that to be symmetric. That'll be alright. Like that, and like that. And then we'll just tidy this one up. Make this one smooth and symmetric. And it's not quite in the middle, being really picky at this particular point. And then we've got a 6, and that's slightly more in keeping with the 6 underneath it. And so if I fill this, because you need to remember, actually, I might just tidy that up. This is where I can spend hours just messing with stuff that I probably should just leave alone. I see things and I go, oh, I can just mess with it a little bit, and then before I know it, I've messed with it way too much and changed things I definitely probably shouldn't have. But hey, it's all part of the fun. So we've got this now. If we go to the layers menu and turn off the background, we've got a hollow 6, and what we actually need is a filled 6. So I need to fill this now, but when I fill this, have a look at what happens. So we go to fill in the fill and stroke, and our center hole there is still there, but we can't see it. So one useful thing you can do when you're doing this, and it just helps to see what you're doing, just change the stroke paint to something else. Now when we fill it, sorry, I filled the wrong thing. Now when we fill this one, we can see that. Now what I'm going to do is punch a hole through here. I could fill this with white, but it's not what we want. We actually need this removed completely. And don't panic that this looks a bit chunky. It looks chunky because I've got fill turned on, but I've also got stroke turned on, and I'm going to turn that off in a minute. The other thing we could do is just change the thickness of the stroke, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So if I do this, you can see that the fill, which is black, is there and the stroke is still there. So yeah, I can minimize and maximize that, but we're going to turn the stroke off completely because all we want is the actual fill. But first and most importantly, we need to knock this hole out. To do that, grab the selection tool, grab the outside, hold down the shift key so that we can select the inside part because they're both separate drawings. This is one Bezier drawing, if you like, and this is another one. We've now selected the two of them, and I'm going to go to Path and go Difference, and Difference will take one away from the other. Now we have that hole that we wanted, and we go to Stroke, Fill and Stroke, and we go to Stroke and turn the stroke off. We've got our 6. Alright, we'll go back and turn on the background again, and you can see that the 6 is fairly close to what it should be. I mean, we could mess with a little bit here and a little bit there and just sort of tidy that up a little bit, but what we've got is a fairly accurate representation of the 6 that was underneath there. Now, something that's really handy that you can do, and I'm not sure whether I actually explain this in another part of the video. If I do, I apologize, but you know, it is really useful. Every layer can have an amount of see-throughiness or opacity, and if we pull down the opacity of this layer that our frequencies are on, then you can start to see the number behind it, and you can start to see that there is a little bit where we've actually gone outside the edges here. It's a little bit more curved in the original font than what we've done here. So we've pushed the corners out a little bit and sort of squared this up a bit more than it should be. So I can go back and fix that, and I may yet do that, but I'm not going to do it now. The next thing I want to do is actually move this out of the way. So click on it to select it, then just move it out of the way. Because I've got all these guides set up and the next digit I want to create is a 0, we've got everything here we need to make a 0. So I'll grab the Bezier tool. I'm basically going to do exactly what we just did. And the inside of the 0, just zoom in a bit, remember control and mouse wheel. Alright, and then all we need to do is mess around with our corners, exactly what we did. Select it first, exactly what we just did on the 6. And I'm just going to do that, tidy that up, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so we've got the 0 sorted out now, and so I will use the select tool, grab this and fill it, and again forgot to do the thing, but let's just do it in the blind. Path, difference. Now that looks really bloated and weird because we've still got stroke on. Turn off the stroke and we've got our 0. Now exactly like we did before, we can then just go Control D for duplicate and then use the right arrow. Sometimes that doesn't work and you've actually got to just click on it, use the arrow. Wow, that's lined up pretty good. Control D to duplicate again. Wow, that's lined up pretty good too. I didn't have to adjust that at all. Now of course this is wrong. That's where the 6 goes. I'll just move that out of the way, go back and click this. And the reason I'm using the right arrow, as I explained in the last video, but maybe not clearly enough, is I want all these to be lined up. If I grab this with the mouse and try and put it where I want it, unless I've created guides and can actually guarantee that it'll line up on the guide, it could be anywhere and it may not be lined up. So I might make another one and then just moved it with the mouse and tried to line it up. Well, I might get it right and I might not. So you can see we're not quite lined up. So I could just use guides and line them all up, but it is just easier, I think, to make each one as you need it, and then use the arrow key, left and right arrow key, to move it across to where it needs to be and call it done. So I've made a 600 that way. So that's 2 ways, and I said I'd show you 3. For the third one, all we're going to do is actually just use the text tool and make numbers. Now that's easier said than done in most cases, because finding the right font can be a nightmare, and if you get the wrong font, maybe no one will notice, but you'll know. And now that I've told you that you'll know, you'll definitely know. Using any old font is not a solution here, because quite often the fonts will just look ghastly, or they'll look wrong. I'm not a designy people, so I can't sort of pick something, so I just copy. But let's start by clicking there and go 700. Now clearly that's wrong, it's too big, so I'm going to go Control A to select all the text, and then I'm going to change it from 30 point font down to, I would say that's 2/3 too much, so let's take it to a 20 point font, see how that looks. Height wise we're pretty close, but clearly this font is too wide. So I could spend all day looking through these fonts, and it's probably a narrow font, so I know that Impact is a narrow font. That's starting to look a little bit closer, maybe. We've got this tool here which changes the spacing between the letters, so I can start to pull it back, but already I can see this is just way too big. So Impact isn't going to work. That's not a suitable font, and you can spend all day and get nowhere. Alright, so let's take a look at ways that you can find fonts that will match what you've got on the dial. My go-to tool is Squirrels Maturator, and it's got some peculiarities, but actually it's pretty good at finding fonts that may actually do what you want, as long as you've got a reasonable copy of the original fonts. So we start off by uploading a copy of our dial, and if we do that, you're going to see the image uploaded, and then it's going to pop up this tool. If you've got ad block on, then this isn't going to work. The simple solution here, if you're using an ad blocker, you need to turn it off or figure out how to whitelist that particular part of the page. So we'll upload this image, and so I'm just going to roll the mouse wheel, which is going to zoom in. All I really care about at the moment is the numbers. I don't want to confuse the tool by having a whole bunch of stuff for it to have to deal with. So I'm going to get really close around the numbers just by dragging this blue box in, just so that there is no confusion. And you can see it's popped up these red boxes around each of the digits, and hopefully what that'll do is find a font that matches this. So click Maturate, it's showing you the bit that it's doing, and then down here it's going to give you all the fonts that it thinks matches. Now this one looks pretty good. Unfortunately it's not a solid font. This one also possibly looks good, but again it's filled with noise. There's clearly some misinterpretation of characters here as well. So the next step, the thing we can do is we can go in and manually adjust. The other thing you'll notice is that there are fonts that cost money here. If you're in the modify page, then you can tell it to use only free fonts. So let's just go through and fix this. Clearly it's split that 0 into 2 halves, so we'll just get rid of those sections. So 6, 0, 7, yep, 0, 0, 8, 0, 0, yep. I think that might have been an L, so let's just change that to a 1 to make sure it's definitely a 1. Get rid of those two. Make sure, yeah, that is a 1. That's fine. 2, 0, 0, 1, 5, 0, 0. Okay, so let's just put zeros in there. So we've identified each one, and now it should be able to match it a little bit more cleanly. So I can compare these fonts that it's recommending with the actual numbers from the dial, and this one's not looking too bad. The serify bits on the 1s may be a bit too brutal. 7 looks about right. The 6 looks a wee bit wrong just here. Now remember, on this particular dial it's very small, and the difference between that and that is probably not going to be terribly noticeable. So I'm kind of looking at this font and thinking it's actually not far off. The 12, there's a little sort of tail missing there. 15's right-ish. So all in all, that's probably the font that I would use. But you can see how useful this tool can be, because I've actually found a font that I could probably use and be reasonably happy with, to just put some text on this dial rather than manually create like we did with the Columbus logo. So let's click on that and click download, and I'll just save it and open it. In Windows you can pretty much just double click a font and click install. You'll get a little dialog box pop up, which just popped up off screen for me, telling you that it's installing. That dialog will disappear. This is now grayed out because it is installed, and we have this font installed. And take note of its name, MLB Astros. You'll need to know that because you're going to need to find it in the font list. Now that's fine, it's installed, but most programs that use fonts do a scan for the fonts when the program starts. So you probably now have to restart Inkscape, otherwise it won't find that font. Okay, so then now that we've got our font installed and I have restarted Inkscape, we can now have a look, and it was called MLB Astros. There we go. And bang, you can instantly see that we're actually fairly close to what we're looking for. I would say we're probably still too big. That is, wow, that is really close. That is ridiculously close. I'd actually probably be pretty happy with that. Now, to do the next font, if I click about here, notice it's gone back to its defaults. That can be really annoying. You can actually change the defaults in the preferences here somewhere. I never bother with that. I think there is a keystroke to actually get it to pick up the defaults as well. But for now, what we'll do instead is we'll select this and we'll duplicate it just the same way we did. And then if we double click on it when we've got the select tool, so we double click somewhere on the text, and you can see we've now got a cursor, and I can just edit the text. Then I go back to the select tool because double clicking the text has put me into the text tool, and using the Alt and the left arrow I can line that up. Now that's looking pretty good to me. I'm fairly happy with how that's going, so I'm just going to continue along. Control D to duplicate, Shift right arrow to move it in large steps, and then just normal arrow to move it in smaller steps. I'm just going to line it up roughly with the start there. Double click, backspace 1 0. That one is pretty close. I'm not super happy with the length of the node, but realistically again it's quite small. You're probably not going to see it, let alone notice. Let's just zoom out and then zoom back in over here. Select tool, select that, Control D for duplicate, right arrow to move it along, double click on it, delete that 0 and put a 2 in. So the 2 is the one thing I'm really not happy with. It doesn't have this tail. What I might do is edit this 2 a little bit later on and add that tail in. But for now, we'll just keep moving along. Control D for duplicate, right arrow. And I'll just bring that back with the Alt left arrow. And double click and put a 5, delete. Right, 5's not perfect, but it's close enough. And when I say close enough, that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because I'm a little bit anal about this stuff, about getting it probably more perfect than it needs to be, to the point where I would consider even bumping out the letter to letter spacing here just to get that spacing the same as it is on the original dial. Letter to letter spacings here, so this does mess with consistency because now the spacing on this one is not the same as this one, but then I'll go back and change this one. So what I'm doing in effect is now making some subtle tweaks. So Control A to select all of it. So I'm making some subtle tweaks that make my dial that I'm creating, and I'm going to go a bit beyond here because it's all offset to the right a little bit, and then select and Alt left arrow back. So yeah, I'm now making each one look like the factory original as much as possible. Okay, frequency's done. Now, one little thing to note here, I'm doing these in black, and so the dial that we're creating is going to be black, but we're not printing this, remember, we're actually using this as a mask to laser etch something, so the color doesn't actually matter. If you had some transfer paper, water slide decal paper, you could probably print this onto it and make a water slide decal to put on a piece of glass, or even the original glass if all the ink had come off it. Okay, so at that point we now have the numbers done, and we've looked at 3 different ways to make them, either using the Bezier tool or the freehand tool to make lines, or using the Bezier tool to do an outline and then fill it and subtract the holes away, or using fonts. Any one of those methods is generally fine. The font one really relies on your ability to find the correct font, or a font that is close enough that it looks original. If you can find the right font and you've got lots of numbers, using fonts is definitely faster. if you can't find the right font, or one that you're not happy with, then just roll your own, make them. It's not as hard as it seems. Okay, so again, I'm going to leave it there. You now actually have probably enough information to go and recreate the dial yourself. What I'm going to do is put this image on the Vintage Radio site for the Model 6. So you can go to the Model 6, pop open that image, right click on it and save it, and then maybe have a crack yourself. And if you do, and you have any questions, if anything's not working the way you expect it to, then please leave a question in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer you. All right, so thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.